Welcome to Conversations with a Wounded Healer. I'm your host, Sarah Buino. I'm a psychotherapist, teacher, consultant, and most importantly, a wounded healer, living and working in Chicago, Illinois.
And I'm your host, Anne Remy. I'm a counseling psychotherapist, yoga teacher, and trauma specialist living in Brighton, UK. On this show, we interview folks in a variety of healing professions, and we discuss the intersectional journey of healing self while caring for others.
But we're not just focused on individual healing, but also healing on the collective level, from white supremacy, late-stage capitalism, and the patriarchy. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Sarah.
Hey, Anne.
How you doing?
I have a hot chai in my belly, and that makes me happy.
Oh, that's really good.
I know that's not really an answer to your question, but that's a thing I'm noticing right now.
Okay, I like that.
How about you?
I got a room temperature water in my belly. Feeling pretty good about that.
Very exotic.
Well, let me tell you what. I had to do a Dutch test this week where you have to dehydrate yourself for 24 hours and then take your pee samples. And I am savoring every drop of water. Like, it was only a day where I had to be dehydrated, and you would think that I haven't had water in a week. I was such a baby about it.
I hate drinking water. I'd be so good at that test.
No, I was like, I can't believe that I would go whole days without drinking. So dramatic. I drink a lot. If you like drinking water, no, I don't have anything good with that. But if you like drinking water, if you love the life force that water is, and you want us to continue having a life force, I'm sorry, editors, just rate us.
It's too cute. It's cute. Just go with it.
Can you all just rate us and review us, please?
Please,
and thank you. We would appreciate it. How about that?
That's great.
Okay, so now on to my conversation with Alex Jones. Not that Alex Jones.
Not that Alex Jones. I think we have to actually have that in the description because that's going to be important.
Yes.
So we're not even going to say the name of his stupid show, the guy who was very terrible and said the Sandy Hook shooting was not real. Yeah. He sucks. This is not that.
This is not that. This is a much nicer, kinder Alex Jones. And what did you think about him, Sarah?
What I told to you before we started recording, I want to say publicly for the listeners that I started listening to the episode and I was like, where's this going? Mm-hmm. This has got to be good because I trust Anne, and it ends up being so beautiful that I almost cried listening to it. And I was like, this just proves that Anne has an amazing knack for guest picking. So I think what the thing was for me is it started out so hyper local, and I have no reference point to Brighton where you live. Fair. So I think Brightonians, if that's what you want to call them, will geek out on this whole thing. Those of us who are not from Brighton, it takes a second to warm up, but once it gets, you're going to know exactly when it hits, and it's beautiful.
What I really loved about speaking to Alex was I've never met him, but I knew from the way he was telling other people's stories and the kindness and the generosity and the warmth and just space that he gives to other people. I knew that he was going to be a great person to speak to. I didn't know how great of a story he was going to bring to us and how open and vulnerable that he would be with somebody he never met. Yeah. And I shed a couple tears listening to his story, and for the rest of the day, and even now when I walk past some of the places that I've seen some of his pictures taken, it makes me it lifts me up. So that hyper locality vibe, it's connected me with the town I live in a very different way, just speaking to him. Yeah. And that's been a real gift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, why don't you introduce us to Alex?
I will. So Alex Jones is a storyteller, interviewer, and documentary photographer dedicated to capturing the depth of human experiences through intimate conversations with strangers. His work is driven by a profound desire to bring people closer together through the transformative power of storytelling. So please enjoy Alex Jones telling his story in this episode. Alex, welcome to Conversations with a Wounded Healer.
Hi, thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah. So I found you through an Instagram account that you run, but maybe you could tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, sure. So I think I'll start from the beginning of the pandemic back in 2020. And like many people at the time, we were trapped indoors, stuck indoors. And there was an inner urge within me to create something beautiful out of the sadness and chaos of the time. And there was a feeling inside me for many years prior to that that I wanted to become a storyteller, but I didn't
Mm.
have the necessary belief within myself that I could do something like that
Mm.
and emulate people like Brandon Stanton, who created Humans of New York many, many years ago, and who
Mhm.
now has a global following of something like 12 million people. And it was in that time where after going through a lot of adversity, I thought, okay, now's the time to just follow my soul's calling and just step out into discomfort and just find a stranger on the street and ask them a question about their life. And
Mm.
I started with 20 followers, and it's now blossomed into something like 7,000 followers over the last 4 years. And it's been a really powerful journey for myself, and
Mhm.
I imagine for those who I've interviewed, because the power of a story is you never know how far it will reach and what it will mean to those who see it and those who have experienced it firsthand after retelling their account. So I've been walking the streets of Brighton for the last 4 years, and I try to find individuals who are sitting by themselves in a park
Mhm.
or just reading a book, and I'll gently ask them, do you have some time for me to ask a few questions? I'll tell them a bit what I do, that I take portraits of people around the city, and that I'm fascinated in people's individual stories and how it can connect us. And often they say yes, and I will sit down with them for 20 minutes to an hour, sometimes a bit longer, and I'll ask them sometimes very deeply personal questions.
Mm.
And because I'm very honest with them from the very beginning about what my intentions are and what the philosophy behind the page involves, I find that they are able to open up quickly. And it's amazing how much people want to talk about their lives, how much they want to share an inner pain and inner struggle that they may have never shared with anyone else before in their life.
Mhm.
And because I am a stranger, and because I create a space for them in which they can just reveal parts of themselves that they would otherwise have remained hidden or didn't feel confident enough to bring out. Yeah, I just sit with them. It's more of a conversation. It's exactly what we're doing right now. I
Mhm.
don't come in with any kind of agenda. When I first began, I thought, I would try and like hook on to something they'd say and I'd try and remember it. But then I realized, no, that's not the way to listen. It's you just let it flow naturally like water. And if you forget something, that's fine because something else will be brought up that may be equally more significant.
I really like that.
Yeah, it's been a real personal journey for myself, overcoming, because I used to live with severe social anxiety. I used to live with
Mhm.
agoraphobia. I couldn't leave the house. So yeah, for me to do this now, it's just an absolute blessing because I find it the most rewarding work I could ever do in my entire life.
Hmm.
Because my goal is to unite people through storytelling. And yeah, that's a bit what I do.
So I really like what you just said about listening being like the flowing of water because it's something that people say to me as a therapist, like, I can't believe you remember all this because I don't take notes.
Mm,
And I think when you are listening in this sort of way of allowing things to just sort of flow in and out of you, it allows different parts of that person's like narrative or story to hit you at different times.
yes.
So I may not remember exactly what you said today, but 3 weeks from now, something you said will kind of come back to me and will be meaningful in that moment. And I think that that's such a really beautiful way of talking about listening and sharing stories. And I just want to share kind of a personal story. So you had posted a portrait of an unhoused man who was really struggling to get back on his feet, and you had started a GoFundMe for him. And, one of the things that has been really nice for me in following your account is, as we discussed, I'm not from here. So quite often in the UK, for me, I feel a bit isolated and a bit detached. And
it's really nice to get to know the other people in the city through this and hearing their stories. And it makes me look at people differently. But the story and the portrait that you had posted about this unhoused man, I actually saw him in the street like a couple days later.
Yeah.
And I stopped and I had a little chat with him, and he had just gotten a dog and was really struggling with people kept trying to take the dog from him, and he couldn't afford to get it a better leash. And I was like, I can't solve every problem, but I can solve this one. And went and got him like something stronger to use as a leash for the dog, because and you could see how much he was caring for it and just really loved that animal. You know, he had put a lot of time into caring for it. So I actually got to hear more of his story, you know, through just sitting there and chatting with him and hanging out with the dog. And, you know, we talked quite a bit, and I would, you know, just kind of see him again every once in a while, and we would chat with each other. And one of the things he said to me was, what a difference you had made in his life by just posting that. He said, the amount of people I'm getting who are trying to help me or are now treating me like a human, as opposed to, you know, someone who just lives in the street. It was completely different just from you posting that. And I think that that's the power of what you're doing and sharing people's stories.
I found interesting when you spoke about how, you know, you say you're not from here and yet you feel connected to the people around you through the storytelling I do of the city. And when I go out on the streets, my vision is this is not just Brighton. This is the entire world before me, because, you know, we're all connected. And, you know, you don't know how far, as I said before, how far a story will reach, like what it will mean to someone in Brazil if I speak to a Brazilian, as I did that guy who grew up in a favela and lost his friends and then turned to paragliding. And I hardly ever hear how someone's been impacted by my work after I've told the story. So it's lovely to hear that from you, like how they opened up about that. With my fundraising, I was in communication with the individual for quite a while. So, but they didn't tell me everything about necessarily what I had done for them. But I don't do it really for building any kind of legacy in a way, because I think building a legacy is kind of futile, because that's not the reason I do it. I just do it because I'm alive. And as you said, you know, you can't help everybody, but you can help somebody. And you don't know how helping that person is going to help others too. And it's incredible with the homeless people, because, you know, when I've literally been sitting down with them, taking their stories, and they have a few pounds in their cup, and another homeless man will walk past and he'll just give all his money away to that person. And one of the main reasons I started Humans of Bright and Hope was to put focus on the homeless situation, because I'm like, well, these people are just completely forgotten on the street, you know, people just walking past. And I wanted to, bring attention to that. And then it, just mushroomed into everybody.
And we live in, you know, for anyone listening who is not from the UK or just hasn't been to Brighton, we live in a town that is so full of characters. You know, the way that I describe it sometimes to people is there are no rules for how you dress or who you love or how you identify. And it does feel like one of the few places I've traveled quite a bit, and it feels like one of the very few places that I've been to that has just a really free and open feel to it. And I know that I've had a lot of people of color tell me it doesn't quite extend to people of color, that it is still a very white city. But when it comes to the general kindness that is shown towards each other, I think that's something you don't see in London. It's something you don't see in a lot of other places.
Yeah, it's a place you can belong no matter how you identify, or embraces you for who you are. Yeah. For me, creating Humans of Brighton and Hove was about giving a gift back to the city, because it's given me so much. And I consider it my adopted city in many ways, because I'm originally from Zimbabwe. And when I first came to this country, I really didn't feel like I belonged at all. It was just a completely different culture. You know, I had culture shock for about 10 years. So coming to Brighton was the first place in the UK where I felt I could begin to learn about me, and people around me supported me to the point where I felt like held held within a city that you didn't need to be anything else but to find out more who you innately are.
You know, I resonate with that so deeply, that culture
Mm.
shock, because I've been here now for 8 years and it's still there. And I think it's not something I considered. You know, I lived in Asia before I moved here. And I think the culture shock was actually bigger moving to the UK than it was moving to Taiwan.
Right.
Yeah, I'm wondering what those first 10 years were like for you as you tried to navigate that.
Well, I moved here when I was economic and social upheaval in Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
It didn't really feel like I could go back to my homeland because it was in such disarray and there was so much political violence. And my parents had been going through a divorce at the same time, so I was losing my homeland and the family unit. It was a very confusing, extremely confusing time when I first moved to Somerset in England. And school was so different, you know, because in Zimbabwe the times were different. You know, you finished about 3 o'clock and then you did a bit of sports, and you know there were like everyone was involved, the parents, the headmaster, the children. It was this like huge collective spirit. But when I got to school, it was kind of regimented. It felt more like a military camp, and you know I was learning Latin, and it just felt very foreign. And I lost touch with my friends because my friends were dispersed all over the world
Yeah.
because of what had happened in Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
And I was also made to feel different because of my, you know, I had a different voice back then. I had a more South African Zimbabwean voice. And they initially saw that as cool, but then I felt different. I've always felt different. And that's been part of also why I've created Humans of Brighton and Hove, because I want people to celebrate that difference. And yeah, so growing up, it was a very tricky period. And for, you know, a lot, I would say about 20 years of my life, I had never really fully investigated, you know, just what an impact those experiences had on my mind, honestly. And that's how I developed social anxiety and agoraphobia, which then led to chronic pain. And so I had to unravel who the hell I was. And it was a massive journey into the self.
A massive journey into the self is so, that phrase really resonates with me as well. And I know how painful that can be.
Yeah.
And I know how terrifying it can be. And I also know how like rewarding it can be. Yeah. In creating this account, I wonder if it feels like in doing some of that inside work that you're then able to kind of bring all of that work then a bit outside, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So for me, it's turning pain into power. Let me backtrack a tiny bit. Like, let me see. It was 2015. So that was when my social anxiety was at its height. And 2016, my social anxiety was really bad. And then there was one day where I was just sitting on a couch in a place I was renting, and Netflix was on. And I was cycling through it, and I found a documentary called Virunga, which is a national park in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And there was just something inside of me that said, listen to this. And I knew I needed to make a change in my life, but I just did not know how. As fortune would have it, a few weeks later, I was just going through Twitter, which I hardly ever did, and saw that there was an expedition to Virunga.
Oh, wow.
So I decided to go, and that's where my journey began, because I fell really ill with this. I don't know what it was, some kind of virus that took me out for 2 weeks, where I wasn't able to eat, hardly able to drink. And it was in that pain and in that suffering where I was introduced to another part of myself that was like, okay, if you can survive this, then what else can you do? Coming back, I was told that my father had terminal cancer. So I was like, right. And then with anxiety, I'd also developed this mysterious illness called chronic pelvic pain syndrome, which is essentially, you know, just urologists don't even know what causes it. So I was like, right, you can't heal me. I can't heal my mind, and my father's dying. So what can I do? So I spoke about Brighton giving me a gift. And one day I was walking past Waterstones, and
Which is a bookshop for people who don't know.
It's a big bookshop. It's a 5-story bookshop. And I went up to the self-help section because I'd started listening to self-help videos like Les Brown and Jim Rohn and Robin Sharma. And I saw the philosophy section, and I thought to myself, you know, what can philosophy do for me, for a man who's suffering in his body, his mind, losing his father? What can it possibly do for me? I actually felt anger because I was going through that period. And I saw this tiny little book with a red cover, and it said, meditations, and I read it, and it said a little breath and a reason to rule all that is myself. And I thought, okay, I want to rule myself, and it was by Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor. And so I opened this book, and that's when my entire worldview just shifted.
Wow.
My whole perspective on pain shifted. This victim mentality that I had developed about, no one, like, kind of, I mean, I was going through pain, but there was a part of me that pitied myself. And that kind of, that was deeply frustrating because I knew I could be more. I just didn't know how. So I became this follower of ancient Stoicism, which is a whole school of ancient Greek philosophical thought. And I learned that Marcus Aurelius, the emperor, had actually been influenced by a man called Epictetus, who was a slave. So a slave had influenced an emperor. So I thought, wow, this must have real power if that can take place. Then I learned about Stoicism. I did courses on it, and then I began to try and bring it to my own life. And because it's such a practical philosophy, it's not men in towers where you can't really access it, but it's just practical. And I began to change my mind through Stoicism and exercise. And then I was able to, battle all those challenges at once.
What was it? It takes a very specific moment and a very specific person in a specific moment to sort of see those signs and to see those challenges and go, okay, now it's time to make a change. What do you think it was about that specific moment that everything just hit exactly in the way that it needed to allow you to be open to that?
I think it was the moment my father called and he said, I have stage 4 cancer. And in that moment, I was like, from this point on, I have to be the kind of man that is able to care for him when that time comes. And I have to meet him in that last hour, And as it turned out, that's exactly what happened. I spent about a year and a half really battling, going to war with my mind. I saw an absolute war because I wouldn't have been able to have that strength at the moment I did had I not, gone to war with it. And through exercise, which I learned isn't just good for the body, it actually changes the mind. It releases brain derived neurotrophic factor, which is like miracle grow for the brain. So I was changing my inner, neurotransmitters and synapses and everything. Everything was growing, and I was expanding with that growth. And it was that moment. It was that moment when he said, I have stage 4 cancer. And that's when I realized, do whatever you have to do to change yourself.
It's such a powerful statement to sort of say, I have to be able to meet him in his last hour.
Yeah. So I went to look after him in December 2017, and I didn't really know what cancer looked like. I didn't know what death looked like. But as I said, I was preparing for it. So, 3 months before I went to South Africa, I actually decided to audition for a war film because I wanted to get the sense of what it was like to be faced down by your own mortality, sort of thing. So I ended up in a ITV production, which is a British television channel, and it was a Vanity Fair, and they wanted extras for Napoleonic battle, which was the Battle of Waterloo. And it was an amazing experience because although bullets weren't firing and cannonballs weren't firing, you got a real sense of what it's like to be faced by your own incoming demise, because they were charging cavalry units at you, guns were firing, smoke. And it's just amazing that the universe gave that to me at that time, because it equipped me with a great belief that I could withstand what I was going to see in South Africa, which is where my father lived. And December 2017 comes around, and I look after him for 2 weeks before he died. And it was the most beautiful 2 weeks because I'd been learning Stoicism, and I'd been approaching the time where I felt like I could speak to my father because, divorce had ruptured communication over the years. I didn't quite know who the hell my father was. So the gift of that time was death had stripped him of any kind of sense of ego. He didn't have a mask anymore. I could just
take your time.
Yeah. I could just see him for who he was, And there were just some amazing things that occurred. Like there was one day where I was really struggling. Like anyone who's cared for somebody in need, it's pretty taxing, and I was exhausted. And then one day was this doorbell rang, and I was alone with my father. And because South Africa can be quite a dangerous place at times, I had a bit of trepidation, but I thought, no, just go and see who it is. And it was a man who was selling his Christmas wares from his car. And I told him what I was going through, and he just gave me this angel, this wire angel. He said, "This is for you, and this is for your father, to give you strength in this time." And that was like one of the greatest gifts anybody has ever given me in my entire life. And it was just a little wire angel. But from that moment on, I was like, right, so if I can get through this, if I can watch my father die, if I can overcome my chronic pain, if I can overcome anxiety, what else can I do? And I decided I've got to take all the lessons I've had over the last 5 years and turn it into something that's like formidably beautiful, because I wanted to turn the pain I was undergoing into something powerful and that could inspire people, and to make them feel less alone in this world, and to make them feel that they matter, because they really, really do. And it's amazing when I speak to people on the street just how much they begin to realize about what they have overcome in their life. And it's really beautiful. The most beautiful times is when there's this like wonderful pause, this silence, and you can feel this like golden energy just emanating off them and circling all around us. And that's their truth. That's the truth of that moment. And that is what I love to hone in on, because I love watching a person unravel before my eyes, the mask coming down, and just seeing their essence, because it's their essence that's going to help people with their own, with their own struggles.
Well, I'm really struck by that story that you told. And first of all, thank you for sharing that moment with us.
That's okay.
But I'm really struck by the fact that that man who came to your door, you told him your story in that moment.
Yes.
You told him what was going on for you, and he reacted to that. And that's exactly what you're doing with other people.
Yeah. And it's funny that if I look back now, the first person I ever interviewed in my life actually was my father when he was dying. And I was asking him about his childhood, things I didn't know, like how he was a soldier in the Rhodesian War and how he became under fire, and the time that an elephant sat on his hand, all these kind of things.
What?
And yeah, like there was a place in Mazoe, like a national park in Zimbabwe, and he was feeding this elephant. And elephants, they have such charismatic ways about them, and you can, when you're around them, you can just get a sense of what they're like. And he was just feeding this elephant, and it decided to rest its entire head on his hand.
Wow.
But it was being pressed against the fence post. And he said he was just hopping up and down, but people thought he was just happy, just excited to see the elephant. But it was stories like this and his upbringing, and I got to understand a deeper part of him as to why he became the man he did, and why he was very closed with his emotions. And I think it was my father's closed emotions that made me all the more driven to actually reveal my own,
Wow.
and to get to the heart of people.
So I think that a lot of therapy and a lot about my job is storytelling. And I really believe in the healing power of stories, whether it's telling your own or hearing somebody else's. And I always say when I'm teaching yoga that our bodies are maps of all of the stories that have happened to us. They are the book that holds all of our life stories in it. And the power of story is one that's always been really important to me. And I'm wondering how you feel about the term healer as applied to what you're doing.
So I feel like I've gone on this very long healing journey within. And in fact, I began to write my own journey. Like I've been writing a book for 5 years now on my own healing journey. And it was actually through writing the book that began to reveal parts of myself that only writing can illuminate.
Yeah.
Because your subconscious is working. And in terms of me being a healer, and even a wounded healer, I definitely feel that's something that strikes a chord with me, because even when I'm out and taking stories and sitting down with someone, I can access those emotions, those days, those even old beliefs that I had, where I'm really able to be in the person's shoes. And through the act of conversation, I'm just saying, it's okay. It's okay to cry. It's okay to have these vulnerabilities. It's okay to feel shame. It's okay to feel anxiety. There's nothing wrong with that. You're human. And I feel a huge amount of my work has come from a place of what I've done to heal myself. Does that answer it?
Yeah, there's there's no right or wrong answer to that one. It's really about how those, and I think you kind of answered the follow-up question, which is how do you feel about the term wounded healer? But if there's anything that you want to expand on with that one.
I think we can only meet others at the depths that we've met ourselves. And within the wound is the antidote to our pain. To be wounded and to feel great pain is actually I see pain, I see even death as a gift, because it magnifies what it means to live. And after my father passed away, a year later, after going to work on myself through the gym, I decided to take on the biggest physical challenge of my life. And I decided to do a Spartan Ultra, which is it's an ultra marathon. I'd never done a marathon before. So
wow,
it was changing my relationship with pain and seeing it as a door into a more powerful self. And it was a really transformative experience, because when you see the world, when you see pain, when you see death, when you see all the things that we're afraid of, things that we're afraid to face in life, you realize that there's nothing in this life can hurt you. Nothing, because pain is indifferent, death is indifferent. It's only our thoughts towards them that cause us anxiety and agony. But the things themselves, they're part of nature, and nothing in nature has been created to persecute us. It's just the flow of life. And so when I see people who are wounded and who are sharing their story with me, I see it as an opportunity to, sometimes I can slightly gently guide them, maybe after our conversation has ended, to show them, hang on, your pain isn't just pain. It's also a way for you to find your power. And I feel like it does empower people, when I speak to them about something that's their great struggle in life. I feel like they are slightly more empowered afterwards, because they just realize what they've overcome. And we're so quick to forget what we've been through.
That, I think, we're so quick to forget what we've been through I feel that personally. And it's something I implement with my therapy clients as well. Let's pause and remember where you were last year, because it's so easy to kind of forget that. And I think about this all the time with my own kind of journey with my health, with my history of chronic pain, with all of these things. Every once in a while, I'm like, hold on, 10 years ago, I was in massive pain and I couldn't do a lot of the stuff that I wanted to do. Or it's so easy to think about what comes next and I want more, or I want to feel better or do more. But there is this look at everything that I've done. And I don't know if you have, well, I guess you've kind of said it. If I can survive this, I can survive anything. And I have a few of those sort of benchmarks in my head that if I'm ever feeling like I'm not going to get through this, or this is causing me too much pain or whatever, I love hiking. I'm a big mountain hiker. It's my thing. And every once in a while, I have to remind myself, you hiked the Himalayas by yourself. You did that. And if you can go up a mountain, you can get through whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
That's my sort of benchmark. You did that. And even with that, sometimes it's easy for me to forget how much pain I was in when I was doing that. And it's one of the reasons that I try to every year or every other year go on a big long hiking trek by myself into mountains, because it does remind me of almost immediately, as soon as I start doing it, I'm like, why am I doing this to myself? This is terrible.
Yeah.
But it brings me back to all of that shit.
Yes.
And I'm alone with it in nature. And I'm like, there's no place to hide from this. Yeah. I am doing something that is physically, mentally, and emotionally painful. And then on the other side of it, I know I'm going to feel great and I'm going to have a lot of great stories to share. But right now, this just sucks. And it's so important for me to kind of connect with that past version of myself in that way.
Yes. What you're bringing up with hiking, it's important, I feel, to create your own obstacles in life, because we live in a society where it's very easy to get by. And I feel without that injection of struggle, then how are you going to be introduced to yourself? There's a lovely, I'm going to paraphrase it, but it's something that I think it was Epictetus. And he said, what would Hercules have become if he hadn't had the trials that he was faced with?
Mm.
And there's a former US Navy SEAL called David Goggins. And you've probably heard of him. And no, okay, he's an ultra marathon runner,
Okay.
and he's done these incredible feats of endurance. And he talks about having a mental cookie jar, which is essentially, he thinks of all the things that he's done in life that were really tough, really difficult, and he'll, figuratively just dip his hand in the cookie jar and pull it out. He just needs a second.
Mm.
And when he pulls it out, he gets all the energy he needs to overcome that next thing. It's really powerful.
I'm thinking about how, I recently watched I don't know if you've seen it, the documentary on Simone Biles on Netflix.
No, I haven't.
So she, in the last Olympic cycle, had a bit of a breakdown and took herself out of the meet. And a lot of people were saying she's supposed to be the best of all time. Maybe she just doesn't want it bad enough. And one of the things that she kind of talks about in the sort of conversation that comes with this is when you approach challenges or pain or struggle, the sort of cultural narrative is to just push through or to muscle through or you force your way through. But what I'm kind of hearing in that is sometimes you do have to take a minute, and sometimes you do have to reflect on the fact that this sucks. And sometimes what you need is to not push through it. Sometimes you need to revisit old stuff or to rest or to find a new way around it. And that's kind of what I'm hearing you say is, here's what I was trying originally, and then I found all these other things, and that actually worked way better for me.
Yeah. So if I think about the work I do with sitting down with people and telling their stories and taking their portraits, it might surprise you to hear, but every single day that I go out, I have this resistance, not because I don't want to speak to people, but because this resistance is working on me. And it's saying, what if you don't do justice to this person's story? All these kind of voices. And instead of saying, right, I'm going to attack this thing and I'm going to put on some motivational music and just find somebody, what I do is I just let go. I just tell myself all I have to do, what I feel I'm put on this earth to do is just find an individual and just ask them, do you have a moment? And then just let everything naturally unfold from that. Because if we force things and if we push, we're just going to create distress within ourselves, and we're probably going to create a worse result, because that's not really our authentic, genuine self coming out. It's more the ego. And the best stories I've told have been the times when I've just been like, just let go and just let the world show you what you need to see and hear.
And every time I record a podcast, even if it's with somebody I already know or someone I don't know, I have that exact same sort of like I want to be able to tell the story they want to tell, and I want to be able to have a meaningful conversation with them and do right by them, and kind of all of that floods in. And then I have to remind myself, we're just two people having a chat.
Exactly.
And whatever's going to come out is whatever's going to come out. And that's fine and great. And we're going to have a better chat if I don't have this agenda. And, you and I don't know each other. And I've learned so much about you today that I'm like, man, I had no idea we were getting all this information and this amazing backstory and, all of this amazing insight. And so to me, this is what I love doing what I do, whether it's through a therapeutic setting or through teaching yoga and allowing people's stories to kind of manifest through their body, or, meeting people through hosting a podcast. This is how we connect. And you get so much from that connection and from hearing other people's experiences.
Definitely. And just talking about connection, sometimes people say, how do you do it? How do you approach strangers? How can you get these stories from them? And I see the person before me, not necessarily as a person. They are a person, they have a face, they have a body. Beneath them, I see a soul. There's a soul there. And it's that soul that I want to connect with. So when you come from that position, when you come from a place of, we are all connected, even the person, who might not even be doing right in the world, somehow we are still all connected because there's a giant tapestry of things interweaving amongst each other. And that's what I see. That's what I see my platform as, just a giant tapestry of human experience. And at the center of it is everybody's souls.
I think that's such a lovely image. And I can already hear Sarah, my co-host, like nodding in approval and absolutely loving that. So yeah, just to kind of wrap up here, I think I just want to tell you that I've been really affected by your story today.
Okay.
And that it's really meant something to me that you kind of came here not knowing me. And you've done, kind of the opposite of what you do every day,
Yeah.
which is asking people for their stories. And
Yeah.
I just really appreciate that you've showed up here with that like authentic willingness to kind of share what came up for you and given us that insight and those stories. And I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, if I'm not bringing myself to this, then, what am I bringing? So I'm grateful. I'm grateful for what you said.
So tell people where they can find you on Instagram.
Yes, they can find me on Humans of Brighton and Hove on Instagram. It's just all one word.
Yep. Yeah, we'll have the links to that in the show notes. So you can easily find Alex's page and meet all of the people that Alex has met through all of his story hearing and storytelling adventures. So thanks for that. And thanks for being on the show today, Alex.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Thanks to our guest for an amazing conversation today. To find out more about today's guest, you can visit www.headheartbiztherapy.com/podcast.
You can find Sarah at Head Heart Biz Therapy on Facebook and Instagram.
And you can find Anne at Spare Room Wellness or spareroomwellness.com.
Thanks as always to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for editing, to Liam O'Donnell for the album art, and to Ben Mueller for our theme music. Until next time, bye-bye.